We trade stocks, we trade carbon, but what if we could trade trash? Sounds a little weird, right? But in Indonesia, there's this really fascinating new market popping out that's trying to turn a massive pollution problem into a powerful solution. And it all revolves around something called plastic credit. To really wrap your head around the scale of this, just look at this number. Every single year, Indonesia has to deal with 4.9 billion kilograms of mismanaged plastic waste. And by mismanaged, I mean it never even makes it to a landfill or a recycling plant. It just disappears into rivers, onto streets, and ultimately into the ocean. I mean, that is just a mind-boggling amount of pollution. But it makes you wonder, what if we've been looking at this all wrong? What if, instead of seeing worthless garbage, we could start treating all that plastic like a valuable commodity, kind of like gold? Okay, so before we dive into the solution, we really need to understand the problem. Indonesia's waste management system is pretty much at a breaking point, and the consequences are, quite literally, overflowing into the ocean. So where does all that mismanaged plastic actually go? Well, get this. An estimated 346 million kilograms of it leaks directly into the ocean every year. You've got these major rivers like the Citarum that are basically acting like giant conveyor belts, just funneling plastic from all over the country straight out to sea. So why is the system failing so badly? Well, it's stuck in what experts call a linear trap. Waste gets collected, it gets transported, and then it just gets dumped. There's no loop, no circularity. It's basically a one-way ticket to a landfill, and the whole system is just completely overwhelmed. And a huge piece of this problem comes down to what some people call impossible plastic. Think about stuff like instant noodle wrappers or those little single-serving coffee sachets. They're made of all these different layers of material fused together, which makes them incredibly difficult and expensive to recycle. And with almost 800,000 tons of this stuff being made every year, there's just no financial reason for anyone to bother collecting it. But here's where the story gets really interesting, because there is a recycling system that actually works. It's just not the one you'd expect. It's run by this massive, almost invisible workforce, the real, unsung heroes of recycling in Indonesia. And when you put the two systems side by side, the difference is just striking. On one hand, you have the official government-run sector. It has pretty limited reach and honestly struggles with efficiency. But on the other hand, you have this informal sector, the waste pickers, the local collectors, and they are incredibly effective at recovering valuable stuff. The catch? They do all this essential work with absolutely no social safety net. And look, the numbers really back this up. In a megacity like Jakarta, the informal sector recovers a staggering 34% of all plastic waste. And if you go to a city like Bandung, that number shoots up to 65%. It's pretty clear that without these workers, the entire system would just collapse. And that really gets us to the core paradox of this whole situation. These people, these communities, are the absolute backbone of the country's recycling system. They are doing an absolutely essential job. And yet, for all their hard work, they get almost no formal recognition, no support, and no protection. So, this is where we need to completely change our thinking. The solution isn't about building more landfills. It's about a total paradigm shift that redefines what we even think of as waste in the first place. And that big shift is called the circular economy. The goal is actually pretty simple, but it's also revolutionary: to design waste out of the system entirely. So instead of that one-way street to the dump we talked about, you create these loops where materials are constantly being reused, recycled, and brought back into the system. And here it is. This is the core idea that could change everything. The moment you stop looking at plastic as worthless trash and start seeing it as a resource, a commodity that has real market value, you create a powerful reason for people to actually collect it, even the impossible kinds. So how in the world do you create a market for something that's been treated as worthless for so long? Well, this is where the mechanics of plastic credits come into play. It's this really clever financial tool that's been designed to tackle an environmental crisis. To put it simply, a plastic credit is basically a certificate. It's verifiable proof that 1 ton of plastic has been pulled out of the environment and properly managed. The best way to think about it is like a carbon credit, but for plastic. Companies can buy these credits to help offset their own plastic footprint. Now, this whole system is built on a really key policy idea called Extended Producer Responsibility, or EPR. It's a pretty straightforward concept. It makes the companies that produce all this plastic packaging financially responsible for what happens to it at the end of its life. And all of a sudden, they have a very real incentive to care about where their products end up. Okay, so let's walk through how this actually works. First, a company buys plastic credits to meet its environmental goals. That money then flows to local organizations who can then pay collectors, especially the ones in the informal sector, to gather plastic waste. And crucially, this now includes that low-value plastic that nobody wanted before. Finally, that collected plastic is properly managed, keeping it out of the rivers and oceans. It creates a direct financial pipeline from corporations to the people on the front lines of this crisis. This all sounds incredibly promising, right? But look, creating a whole new market from scratch is never that simple. So let's take an honest look at both the enormous potential of this idea and some of the very real challenges that could get in the way. So, on the one hand, the potential is huge. This system finally puts a real dollar value on collecting that impossible plastic. It recognizes and, more importantly, funds the crucial work of the informal sector. And it gives companies a transparent, verifiable way to take responsibility for their impact. In theory, it really connects all the pieces of the puzzle. But, and this is a big but, there is a massive hurdle. For any market like this to work, people have to trust it. And when you look at public sentiment in Indonesia, you see this huge challenge, a deep distrust in how environmental rules are governed. Without public buy-in, without a real belief that the system is fair and transparent, even the most brilliant solution is probably going to fail. And that brings us to the ultimate question here. Plastic credits seem like a powerful tool, one that can fund cleanups and empower communities on the ground. But is it a real solution, or is it just a clever way for companies to keep polluting while paying someone else to clean up the mess? At the end of the day, can we really buy our way out of a pollution crisis? Well, the answer to that is still being written.